The Quidditch final. He he sent this to me, Hermione said, holding out the letter. Harry took it. The parchment was damp, and enormous teardrops smudged the stain so badly in places that it was difficult to read. Dear Hermione, we lost. I'm allowed to bring him back to Hogwarts. Execution date to be fixed. Beaky has enjoyed London. I won't forget all the help you gave us, Hagrid. They can't do this, said Harry. They can't. Buckbeak isn't dangerous. Malfoy's dad frightened the commissioner into it, said Hermione, wiping her eyes. You know what he's like. They're a bunch of dotty old fools. And they were scared. There'll be an appeal, though. There always is. Only I can't see any hope. Nothing will have changed. Yeah, it will, said Ron fiercely. You won't have to do all the work alone this time, Hermione. I'll help. Oh, Ron! Hermione flung her arms around Ron's neck and broke down completely. Ron, looking quite terrified, patted her very awkwardly on the top of the head, and finally Hermione drew away. Ron, I'm really, really sorry about Scabbers, she sobbed. Oh, well, he was old, said Ron, looking thoroughly relieved that she had let go of him. And he was a bit useless, you know. Mom and Dad might get me an owl now. The safety measures imposed on the students since Black's second break-in made it impossible for Harry, Ron, or Hermione to go visit Hagrid in the evenings. Their only chance to talking to him was during the Care of Magical Creatures lessons. He seemed numb with shock at the verdict. It's all my fault. Got me tongue-tied. They was all sitting there in their black robes, and I kept dropping me notes and forgetting all them dates you told me to look up, Hermione. And then Lucius Malfoy stood up and did his bit, and the committee just did exactly what he told them. There's still an appeal, Ron said fiercely. Don't give up. We're working on it. They were walking back up to the castle, the rest of the class ahead. They could see Malfoy, who was walking with Crabbe and Goyle, kept looking back, laughing derisively. It's no good, Ron, said Hagrid, sadly, and they reached up in the castle steps. That's Committee Lucius Malfoy's pocket. I'm going to make sure the rest of Beaky's time is the happiest he's ever had. I owe him that. Hagrid turned around and hurried back towards the cabin, then his face buried in his handkerchief. Look at him blubber! Malfoy, Crabbe, and Goyle had been standing just inside the castle doors listening. Have you ever seen quite as pathetic, said Malfoy. And he's supposed to be our teacher. Ron and Hermione made furious moves towards Malfoy, but Hermione got them first. Smack! She had slapped Malfoy across the face with all the strength she could muster. Malfoy staggered. Harry and Ron, Crabbe, and Goyle were flabbergasted as Hermione raised her hand again. Don't you dare call Hagrid pathetic, you fool, you evil. Hermione, said Ron weakly, as he tried to grab her hand as she swung back. Get off, Ron! Hermione pulled out her wand, and Malfoy stepped back. Crabbe Goyle looked at him for instructions, thoroughly bewildered. Come on, Malfoy, muttered in a moment. All three of them had disappeared into the passageway of the dungeons. Hermione, said Ron again, sounding both stunned and impressed. Harry, you'd better beat him on the Quidditch final, said Hermione shrilly. You just had because I can't stand it if Slytherin wins. Well, we're due in charms, said Ron, still goggling at Hermione. We'd better go. They hurried up to the marble staircase, Professor Flitwick's room. You're late, boys, said Professor Flitwick reprovingly as Harry opened the classroom door. Come along quickly. Wands out. We're experimenting with cheering charms today. We've already divided into pairs. Harry and Ron hurried to the desk and back and opened the bags. Ron looked behind him. Where's Hermione gone? Harry looked around, too. Hermione hadn't entered the classroom. Yet Harry knew she had been right next to him when he had opened the door. That's so weird. said Harry, staring at Ron. Maybe she went to the bathroom or something? But Hermione didn't turn up all lesson. She should have done with cheering charms on her too, said Ron as the class left at lunch and grinning broadly. The cheering charms had left them all feeling with great contentment. Hermione wasn't at lunch either. By the time they had finished their apple pie and the after effects of the cheering charms were wearing off, and Harry and Ron were starting to get slightly worried. You don't think Malfoy did something to her? Ron said anxiously as they hurried upstairs towards the Gryffindor Tower. They passed the security trolls, gave the fat lady the password, flibber glibber, and scrambled through the portrait hole into the common room. Hermione was sitting at a table fast asleep, her head resting on an open arithmetic book. They went to sit down on either side of her. Harry prodded her awake. What? Said Hermione, waking with a start and staring wildly around. Is it time to go? Well, which lessons have we got now? Divination. But it's not for another 20 minutes, said Harry. Hermione, why didn't you come to Charms? What? Oh no, Hermione squeaked. I forgot to go to Charms. But how could you forget, said Harry. You were with us till we were outside the classroom. I don't believe it, Hermione wailed. Was Professor Flitwick angry? Oh, it was Malfoy. I was thinking about him and I lost track of things. You know what, Hermione, said Ron, looking down at the enormous arithmetic book Hermione had been using as a pillow. I reckon you're cracking up. You're trying to do too much. No, I'm not, said Hermione, brushing her hair out of her eyes and staring hopelessly around for her bag. I just made a mistake, that's all. I'll be back. I'd better go see Professor Flitwick and say sorry. I'll see you at divination. Hermione joined them at the foot of the ladder to Professor Trelawney's classroom 20 minutes later, looking extremely harassed. Oh, I can't believe I missed cheering charms. I bet they come up in the exams. Professor Flitwick hinted they might. Together they climbed the ladder into the dim, stifling tower room. Glowing on every side of the light table was a crystal ball full of pearly white mist. Harry, Ron, and Hermione sat down together at the same rickety table. I thought we weren't starting crystal balls until next term, Ron muttered, casting a wary eye around at Professor Trelawney in case she was lurking nearby. Don't complain, this means we've finished palmistry, Harry murmured. I was getting sick of flinching every time she looked at my hands. Good day to you, said the familiar misty voice. And Professor Trelawney made her usual dramatic entrance out of the shadows of Parvati and Lavender quivered with excitement, their face lit in milky glow of the crystal ball. I've decided to introduce the crystal ball a little earlier than I had planned, said Professor Trelawney, sitting in the back of the fire and gazing around. The fates have informed me that your examination in June will concern the orb, and I'm anxious to give you sufficient practice. Hermione snorted. Well, honestly, the fates informed her. Who sets the exam? She does. What an amazing prediction, she said, troubling to keep her voice low. Not troubling to keep her voice low. Harry and Ron choked back laughs. It was hard to tell whether Professor Trelawney had heard them, as her face was hidden in the shadows. She continued, however, as though she had not. Crystal gazing is particularly refined art, she said dreamily. I do not expect any of you to see what you first peer into the orb's infinite depths. We shall start by practicing relaxing the conscious mind and external eyes. Ron began to snigger uncontrollably, and he had to stuff his fist in his mouth to settle the noise. So as to clear the inner eye and the superconscious, perhaps if we are lucky, some of you will see before the end of class. And so began. Harry at least felt extremely foolish staring blankly into a crystal ball, trying to keep his mind empty, and thoughts such as, this is stupid, kept drifting across it. It didn't help that Ron kept breaking into silent giggles and Hermione kept tutting. See anything yet? Ron asked him after a quarter of an hour's quiet crystal ball gazing. Yeah, there's a there's a burn on this table, said Ron, pointing. Someone spilled their candle. This is such a waste of time, Hermione hissed. I could be practicing something useful. I could be catching up on cheering charms. Professor Trelawney rustled past. Would anyone like to tell me, interrupt the shadowy portents within the orb? She murmured over clinking her bangles. I don't need help, Ron whispered. It's obvious that what this means. There's going to be loads of fog tonight. Both Harry and Hermione burst out laughing. Now really, said Professor Trelawney as everyone's heads turned in the direction of Parvati and Lavender were looking scandalized. You are disturbing the clairvoyant's vibrations. She approached their table and she peered into the crystal ball. Harry felt his heart sinking. He was sure he knew it was coming. There's something in here, said Professor Trelawney, whispered low, lowering her face to the ball, so that she reflected twice in her eyes, so that reflected twice in her huge glasses. Something is moving. But what is it? Harry was prepared to bet everything he owned, including his firebolt, that it wasn't good news, whatever it was, and it was, and sure enough, my dear, said Professor Trelawney, breathed, gazing up at Harry. It is here, plainer than ever before, my dear, stalking towards you, growing ever closer. The grim. Oh, for goodness sake, said Hermione loudly. Not this ridiculous grim again. Professor Trelawney raised her enormous eyes to Hermione in her face. Parvati whispered something to Lavender, and they both glared at Hermione, too. Professor Trelawney stood up, surveying Hermione with unmistakable anger. I'm sorry to say that from the moment you have arrived in this class, my dear, it has been apparent that you do not have what the noble art of divination requires. Indeed, I don't remember ever meeting a student whose mind was so hopelessly mundane. There was a moment's silence, then, Fine, said Hermione, suddenly getting up and cramming Unfogging the Future back into her bag. Fine, she repeated, swinging the bag over her shoulder and almost knocking Ron off his chair. I give up. I'm leaving. And the whole class in amazement. Hermione stood up, strode over to the trapdoor, kicked it open, climbed down the ladder, out of sight. It took a few minutes for the class to settle down again. Professor Trelawney seemed to have forgotten about the grim. She turned abruptly from Harry and Ron's table, breathing rather heavily, and she rugged her gazy shawl more closely to her. Ooh, said Lavender suddenly, making everyone start. Ooh, Professor Trelawney, I've just remembered. You saw her leaving, didn't you? Didn't you, Professor? Around Easter. One number will leave us forever. You said that ages ago, Professor. Trelawney gave her a dreary smile. Yes, my dear, I did indeed know that Miss Granger would be leaving us. One hopes, however, that one might have mistaken the signs. The inner eye can be a burden, you know. Lavender and Parvati, looking deeply impressed, and moved over to so that Professor Trelawney could join them at their table. Someday Hermione's having, eh? Ron muttered to Harry, looking odd. Yeah. Harry glanced back into the crystal ball, but he saw nothing but swirling white mist. Had Professor Trelawney really seen the grim again? Would he? The later thing that he needed was another near-fatal accident with the Quidditch final drawing near. The Easter holidays were not exactly relaxing. The third years had never had so much homework. Neville Longbottom seemed close to a nervous collapse, and he wasn't the only one. Call this a holiday? Seamus Finnegan roared in the Commons room in the afternoon. The exam are ages away. What are they playing at? But nobody had much to do with Hermione. Even without divination, she was taking more subjects than anyone else. She was usually last to leave the common room at night, first to arrive in the library, and the next morning. She had shadows like lupins under her eyes and seemed constantly close to tears. Ron had taken over the responsibility for Buckbeak's appeal. When he wasn't doing his own work, he was poring over the enormously thick volumes with names like Handbook of Hippogriff Psychology and Foul or Foul, and the study of hippogriff brutality. He was so absorbed he even forgot his horrible to be horrible to Crookshanks. Harry, meanwhile, had to fit in his homework around Quidditch practice every day, not to mention endless discussions of tactics with Wood. The Gryffindor-Slytherin match would take place on the first Saturday after Easter holiday. Slytherin was leading the tournament by exactly 200 points. That means Wood consistently reminded this team that they needed to win the match by more than the amount of the cup. It would mean the burden of winning fell largely on Harry because capturing the snitch was worth 150 points. So you must catch it, only if we're more than 50 points up, Wood told Harry constantly. Only if we're more than 50 points up, Harry, or we win the match and then lose the cup. You've got that? Haven't you? You must catch the snitch, only if we're... I know, Oliver, yelled Harry. The whole Gryffindor house was obsessed with the coming match. Gryffindor hadn't won the Quidditch Cup since the last legendary Charlie Weasley, Ron's second eldest brother, had been the Seeker. But Harry doubted whether any of them, and even Wood, wanted to win as much as he did. The enmity between Harry and Malfoy was at the highest point ever. Malfoy was still smarting about the mud-throwing incident at Hogsmeade, and was even more furious at Harry somehow wormed his way out of the punishment. Harry hadn't forgotten Malfoy's attempt to sabotage him in as much as the Ravenclaw, but it was a matter of Buckbeak that made him more determined than ever to beat Malfoy in front of the entire school. Never in anyone's memory had a match approached in such a highly charged atmosphere. By the time of the holidays were over, the tension between the two teams and the houses were at the breaking point. A number of small scuffles broke out in the corridors, culminating in a nasty incident in which a Gryffindor 4th year and a Slytherin 6th year ended up in the hospital wing with leaks sprouting out of their ears. Harry was having a particularly bad time of it. He couldn't walk into a class without Slytherins sticking out their legs and trying to trip him up. Grab and Goyle kept popping him up wherever he went and slouching away, looking disappointed when they saw him surrounded by people. Wood had given instructions that Harry should be accompanied everywhere, in case Slytherins tried to put him out of the action. The whole Gryffindor house took on the challenge so enthusiastically, so it was impossible for Harry to get to classes on time because he was surrounded by a vast, chattering crowd. Harry was more concerned for his fireball's safety than his own. When he was flying it, he locked it securely in his trunk and frequently dashed back to Gryffindor Tower to breakneck time to check that it was still there. As usual, pursuits abandoned the Gryffindor common room at night before the match. Even Hermione had put down her books. I can't work. I can't even concentrate, she said nervously. There had been a great deal of noise. Fred and George Weasley were dealing with their pressure by being louder and more exuberant than ever. Oliver Wood was crouched over the model of the Quidditch field in the corner, prodding little figures across it with his hand, muttering to himself. Angelina, Alicia, and Katie were laughing at Fred and George's jokes. Harry was sitting with Ron and Hermione, removed from the center of things, trying not to think about the next day, because every time he did, he had this horrible sensation that something very large was fighting to get out of his stomach. You're going to be fine, Hermione told him, and she looked positively terrified. You've got the firebolt, said Ron. Yeah, said Harry, his stomach whirling. It came to the belief that Wood suddenly stood up and yelled, Team, bed! Harry slept badly. First he dreamed that he had overslept and that Wood was yelling, "Where were you? We had to use Neville instead." Then he had a dream that Malfoy and the rest of the Slytherin team arrived to the match riding dragons. He was flying at breakneck speed, trying to avoid spurts of flames from Malfoy's steed's mouth. He realized that he had forgotten his firebolt. He fell through the air and woke with a start. It was a few seconds before Harry remembered that the match had taken place yet, and he was safe in his bed, and that the Slytherin team definitely would not be allowed to play with dragons. He was feeling very thirsty. Quietly as he could, he got up out of his four-poster bed and went to pour himself some water from the silver jug beneath the window. The grounds were still and quiet. No breath of wind disturbed the treetops, the forbidden forest. The whomping willow was motionless and innocent-looking. It looked as though the conditions for the match would be perfect. Harry set down his goblet and was about to turn back into his bed when something caught his eye. An animal of some kind was prowling across the silvery lawn. Harry dashed to his bedside table, snatched up his glasses, put them on, and hurried back. It couldn't be the Grim. Not now, not the night before the match. He peered through the grounds again and again after the minute of frantic searching spotted it. It was striking the edge of the forest now. It wasn't the Grim at all. It was a cat. Harry clutched the window ledge in relief and recognized that the bottle-brush tail, it was only Crookshanks. Or was it only Crookshanks? Harry squinted, pressing his nose flat against the glass. Crookshanks seemed to have come to a halt. Harry was sure he could see something moving in the shadow of the trees, too. And just then it emerged, a gigantic, shaggy black dog, moving stealthily over the lawn, Crookshanks trotting at its side. Harry stared. What does this mean? If Crookshanks could see the dog as well, how could it be an omen to Harry's death? Ron, Harry hissed. Ron, wake up. Huh? I need you to tell me if you see something. It's all dark, Harry, Ron muttered thickly. What are you on about? Down here. He pointed out of the window. Crookshanks and the dog had vanished. Harry climbed onto the windowsill to look right down the shadowy of the castle, but they weren't there. Where had they gone? A loud snore told him that Ron had fallen back asleep. Harry and the rest of the Gryffindor team entered the Great Hall the next day to enormous applause. Harry couldn't help but grinning broadly as he saw both the Ravenclaw and Hufflepuff tables were applauding them too. The Slytherin table hissed loudly as they passed. Harry noticed that Malfoy looked even paler than usual. Wood spent the whole breakfast urging his team to eat, while touching nothing himself. Then he hurried off to the field before anyone else had finished, so they could get the idea of the conditions. As they left the Great Hall, everyone applauded again. Good luck, Harry, called Cho. Harry felt himself blushing. Okay, no wind to speak of. Sun's a bit bright. That could impair your vision. Watch out for it. Ground's fairly hard. Good. That'll give us a good fast kickoff.